Welcome to today's webinar, and thank you all for joining us for what we hope will be a great discussion. This is Libby Doggett. I'm the Deputy Assistant Secretary here at the U.S. Department of Education and head up the early learning team and do policy around early learning, and was formerly at the department years ago working in the Office of Special Education. So I have one foot in regular education and one foot in special education. I'm delighted to be here in this job, but also delighted to be on this webinar. As you all may know, that in September 2015, the Departments of Education and Health and Human Services released a policy statement on inclusion in early childhood programs. And today's webinar is the third in a series of webinars that ED and HHS as well as other supporting offices and agencies will be holding around inclusion in early childhood programs. You can tell we really care about it. The Office of Early Learning is happy to be hosting this webinar today with the support from AEM. So the next slide. Children with disabilities and their families continue to face significant barriers to accessing inclusive, high-quality early childhood programs. Too many preschool children with disabilities are only offered the option of receiving special education services in settings separate from their peers without disabilities. Being meaningfully included as a member of society is the first step to equal opportunity and one of America's most cherished ideals. And it's really just every person's right. It's a right to be supported by, it's right that is supported by our laws. And through this policy statement, we're really setting the expectation for high-quality inclusion in early childhood programs. Years ago, before coming to Washington, I headed up the Association for Retarded Citizens and worked with children and adults and their families all across the state of Texas on inclusion. And I could see what a difference it made for the children and for their families when they were included in school and in other activities, including churches. Next slide, please. I'm pleased to be joined today by 3 state teams. These are awesome teams who are really forging ahead with the recommendations for implementing the high-quality inclusion programs. They really have used our policy statement as a means for pushing this agenda forward. Each of these states have also been awarded an Early Learning Challenge Grant and a Preschool Development Grant, and they include presenters from Maryland. Next slide. And that lists our fantastic team in Maryland. And then you can see our team there in Massachusetts, headed up by Chris Pond. And then our team for Vermont, headed up by Katie Rogers. And I think when you hear what they're doing, you'll be as impressed as I am with the great teamwork and also the great progress that they're making. So the next slide. For today's discussion, we want to talk about the recommendations for state action that are included in this policy statement. It's particularly on pages 8 through 14. And we're interested in hearing from other states and from these states on how they're beginning to look at the state recommendations, such as, and the next slide lists these, a list of recommendations. The creation of a state interagency task force and plan for inclusion, ensuring state policies support high-quality inclusion, setting goals and tracking data, and other state recommendations. In addition, we also want to hear how the state is beginning to support their local programs. When I was working on this full-time before I came to D.C., I really found that one of the barriers, in fact, the biggest barrier, was attitudes. And so I'll be anxious to hear how these teams have worked with parents and with teachers to change attitudes, because sometimes our teachers who work in special education think the children are going to get the best services in a specialized segregated class, and parents may think so as well. So let me turn this over to our team at Maryland, and can you all please tell us how you've implemented the recommendations for state action? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Libby. This is Marcella Frankowski. I'm the Assistant State Superintendent for the Division of Special Education Early Intervention Services here in Maryland. And with me today I have Nancy Verobi and Jen Parker. The I think, Libby, number one, having that inclusion policy statement really gave states teeth and helped us to use that document to inform and to begin that, like you said, that culture shift, that thinking shift, not only from service providers or our teachers or our leaders, but also our families. So when we began this work and looking at this work, a major piece that drove was the creation of a birth through 5 system of services that would be seamless and comprehensive. So with that, what did that look like? We began shifting the thinking with the messaging all around access and equity. And just like the message has always been that readiness and development begins at birth, the message with that, for that culture shift and that thinking, is also that access and equity begin at birth. So not allowing separation or segregation to be an option, but one that all of our IFSP and our IEP decision-making was around starting in typical environments, community-based settings, and then what were those added supports that were needed. So that really was a culture shift. Also showing through data, qualitative and quantitative, that children that have opportunities to participate with their peers who do not have identified disabilities and are supported in accessing the regular early childhood curriculum at their instructional level, we saw the benefits and we used data to demonstrate the benefits not only to a child with students with disabilities, but that families access and equity in the community, and then also the benefit for the child and families, for the child without disabilities and the benefits to their families. Really looking at some strategies for our work. Universal Design for Learning is for everyone. We truly talked about how through a multi-tiered systems of support that everyone gets the same things. Whatever is going on in that community setting, whatever is being received by everyone is for all, and then how we truly then focus in on specially designed instruction. For this, and very briefly to close, you'll see in front of you our strategic plan, which has become our marketing and our messaging and our implementation tool to focus on how, knowing that progress is expected, but our work is around narrowing the gap. You'll see the 3 strategic imperatives in the middle. First, the orange, early childhood, knowing that the earlier the better. That truly supports the policy statement. Number 2, secondary transition, we know what it takes, and again, that look at where our children will be at the end of formal education begins way back and in our very youngest and our earliest learners. And then the green that you see is the access to all materials, equity in experiences and in programs and in curriculum and resources for all, with the expectation for progress. And then in conclusion, the outer for that, what are the key strategies, the key variables that will drive this are key strategic collaborative partners across internal and external, having information that will drive decision-making and that data, looking at families as our key partners in this work, looking at our professional learning, and that's everyone who touches the child, not only people that hold a degree, but everyone who supports that child and family, and then as well as our effective strategy. So it is very clear that we look at not only quality, but something that we're focusing on here is what is the evidence-based practices that create effective results. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nancy and Jen to share some of our specific strategies on our work that we're doing in Maryland. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Marcella. As Marcella referenced, the joint policy paper on early childhood inclusion provided us with an opportunity to highlight and build on Maryland's existing work that is focused on expanding opportunities for young children ages 3 through 5 for participation in regular early childhood settings that are both community and school-based. So looking at leveraging our existing work through professional learning institutes, which we conduct on a quarterly basis, leadership teams from the 24 local infants and toddlers programs, 24 local school systems, the Maryland School for the Blind, and the Maryland School for the Deaf, along with private and public partners, our division staff have supported local capacity building to expand inclusive opportunities and to address those evidence-based practices that provide children with access to that general early childhood curriculum, that also emphasize and maintain high expectations for each child, and that central to all of our work, where we actively engage families and partners in decision-making for their child. Maryland has established its own multi-tiered system of support. We have a liaison structure that facilitates positive change through the development of our professional relationships, a shared expertise, and intentional strategies or frameworks, one of which that we use and we've adapted, implementation science. In addition, we have implemented a reflective coaching model through our Making Access Happen initiative, which received funding through Maryland's Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge grant. Making Access Happen is based in part on the work of Sheldon and Rush, but we've given it our own Maryland twist. The goal of MAH is to build local teams of reflective coaches, and that's the strategy, not the end, who take a strengths-based approach to working with those community-based early care and education partners to expand access by children with disabilities to a full range of early childhood programs and settings. So we're working in partnership and building capacity and learning from each other through this reciprocal reflective coaching approach. All of these activities are aligned with Maryland's strategic plan, Moving Maryland Forward, and have positioned us to take advantage of the federal level renewed emphasis on inclusion as expressed in the Joint Policy Statement response. So it's through these leveraging the existing work that's going on, leading us to creating a renewed focus on expanding inclusion. We're really excited about an upcoming inclusion vision work group that we've renamed our Access and Equity Focus Group for Early Childhood, looking at the development over 3 meetings of a long-term project plan, and something that Jen will talk a little bit more about, our recent exciting notification, that we have been selected to be included in the ECTA-DAISY inclusion cohort for the coming year. So I'm now going to turn it over to Jen Parker, who's going to go into a little bit more detail about our next steps and our moving things forward.
Thank you, Nancy. As we considered the specific action steps outlined in the Joint Policy Statement, we focused on the top recommendation for both locals and states, to create a vision statement for inclusion. This recommendation really spoke to us because when we reflected on past inclusion work groups and the deliverables that came from those work groups, we realized that those groups had focused and written a very good mission around the work that Maryland was doing, but had not previously created a vision statement of where we were going. So we made this our immediate work. To create Maryland's vision for early childhood inclusion, we invited 18 stakeholders to participate in a 3-session development process, which you see here on this slide. Our stakeholders come from varied backgrounds, both internal and external stakeholders from child care facilities, families with children with disabilities, local infant and toddler programs, local school systems, higher education, and other external organizations. Over the next 3 months, we're going to be reviewing the Joint Policy Statement on Early Childhood Inclusion. We're going to collaboratively look at elements and characteristics of vision statements versus missions. We'll be reviewing other states' vision statements on inclusion and begin to develop our own Maryland vision statement using a collaborative protocol. On the last session, we're going to complete that and finalize and discuss how to market and distribute our new vision statement. We'll review past work groups, deliverables, and we'll look ahead to our long-term work. Next slide, please. For our longer-term work, which will be framed and supported by our new vision statement, we are creating a 5-year access and equity project plan. This project plan is aligned to implementation science, and while long-term initiatives are going to be determined in the next few months, we are preliminarily looking at a focus on Maryland's QRIS system called EXCELS, behavioral supports, and a response and policies around suspensions and expulsions. Lastly, we are excited to share that Maryland has been selected to participate in the newly formed ECTA-DAISY Inclusion Topic Cohort, which Nancy mentioned. The cohort will provide Maryland with technical assistance around our state goals, which include supporting child care centers and their commitment to quality improvement through developing new tools for our QRIS Maryland EXCELS, particularly in the areas of developmentally appropriate practices and administrative policies and practices standards. Our second state goal is around implementing initiatives around management of challenging behavior. And our third state goal is completing a national validation process for our access and equity plan. One of the questions that we were asked to consider in preparing for the webinar was what challenges and barriers there are at the local level, as well as how we'll support the locals in our access and equity work. And what we've learned is that most barriers at the local level are usually related to a lack of fidelity with the active implementation framework. So what you see on this slide is the structure, the teaming structure for our SISIP, state-based implementation teams, and local teams. And like our SISIP state-based implementation team, long-term access and equity work in Maryland will be framed by implementation science. Our access and equity state implementation team will directly support local jurisdiction implementation teams, and those local teams will then be linked to us intricately while providing support to their cadre of coaching experts who are coaching around inclusive practices, who in turn will provide direct support in early care and education systems. Is there anything that you'd like to add, Nancy?
No, I think that's really what we're very excited about is the opportunities presented by the joint policy paper, and then the additional technical assistance support that will be through the DAISY and ECTA cohort. So we're very, very appreciative of all the different levels of support and opportunity for helping us to move our, develop and move our vision forward.
That's fantastic. It's so impressive what you all are doing in Maryland. Of course, I've gotten to come to Maryland and meet some of you and see your great work, which has been fun. If you were advising a state on the first place to start, because you've done so much, I mean, your plan is comprehensive, you've involved lots of stakeholders, and you've involved families, and you've really used the implementation science. There's so much that I like about this, but what would be the first step a state might take?
Well, we've started with looking at our data and really digging deep into that data and getting a sense of where children really are spending their time. We did an interesting survey of our locals, asking them to describe their continuum, and every local jurisdiction included every setting on their continuum. But the data revealed that there was a disconnect there. So there was a perception of how services were being delivered, but then the actual way in which services and the location where services were being delivered was different. So that began a discussion, and we really approached it, Libby, through a partnership. It wasn't a gotcha. It was a we all really want this, and so let's look really honestly at what our current system looks like, and then have that also as a basis for dialogue with our partners. And I think also, in addition, looking to, particularly to your partners, your community-based partners and your families, and getting their feedback on the kinds of challenges. And again, it's not a gotcha, it's how can we work together to make this happen for every child.
And in the spirit of working together, I think a couple of things that we did that I would strongly recommend to other states is when we pulled the data together and sent it to our jurisdictions, we sent the data along with a set of reflective questions so that our school districts could come together in a team and review the reflective questions that we suggested together. And then we followed up on that in our professional learning institutes, giving an analysis, giving some questions that we asked at the state level that could also be reflected on at the local level.
I love it. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Now I want to hear from Vermont. So Vermont, tell us a little bit about how you're implementing the recommendations in the state or in our policy statement.
Now, as you can see the screen, Vermont has almost concluded its maple sugaring season. And so I'd like to say that if you don't mind me being a little sappy, the pun is intended, I think we have the sweetest kids in the state, and we absolutely support them the best that we can. So you can go ahead.
Next slide.
Yes, please. So with me today are Katie McCarthy, who is the Vermont Agency of Education Pre-K Inclusion Coordinator. This is a new position for the agency, and we're absolutely ecstatic that we were able to put an inclusion coordinator in place. Also with us today is Camille Catlett, who Vermont has contracted with to support moving Vermont forward with developing guiding principles for inclusion among other work with professional development and higher ed planning. You'll hear both from Katie and Camille in just a few moments. Next slide, please.
So this is Camille, if I can take over next.
Hold on, Camille.
Sorry, Kate.
Yep, I just have a little bit more to do, so sorry. So I just want to share that 76% of our 3-, 4-, and 5-year-olds with disabilities receive their special education and related services in regular education settings. Now, we'd really love to boast about Vermont's percentages here, but even though it looks pretty good for our annual performance report, we have a lot of work to do to ensure that each child with a disability not only has access to regular early childhood settings, but they participate with their peers in daily routines and across learning activities across the day to the fullest extent possible. Given the supports that each of those children need, as well as the necessary resources and supports that the adults require to support the children. So this leads us to the question of what defines a high-quality, inclusive early childhood program and how we can ensure that high-quality, inclusive education for each child exists. Vermont, as many of your other states here, really have been excited about the Division for Early Childhood Recommended Practice and the joint policy statement on inclusion. It couldn't have happened at a better time, absolutely. This was prime time as Vermont is moving forward. We utilize the recommended practices and the policy statement as the foundation for moving forward. We also utilize the quality resources and technical assistance from ECTA and DAISY and other national TAs. I can't speak more about the support that we are receiving as a state from our national TA centers. So with that said, let's look at recommendation 1, creating state-level interagency task force. In Vermont, we have a saying that start small to go big, and of course, over the course of this past year, stakeholder work groups were comprised of early childhood leaders and practitioners met with the purpose of developing a set of guiding principles on inclusion. Upon reviewing the research, policy statements, and initiatives in other states, the stakeholders, with the guidance from Camille, have determined that developing a set of guiding principles is exactly what Vermont hoped to achieve. And with that, we are calling them the guiding principles for the full participation of each and every child. So now, Camille, I'm gonna share with you. There you go.
Thanks, everyone. Hello. I apologize for the miscue. I'm in North Carolina, and Kate and Katie are in Vermont. So this echoes things that Marcella said as well, and any of these are ideas that we would be happy to share more about that will give you a brief overview. One is that in recommendation 2, we were very much invited to build on existing documents and standards. And so one illustration of how Vermont is taking that very seriously, they have newly approved birth through grade 3 early learning standards. And as part of the sequence of professional development related to those standards, there is a strong and consistent effort to underscore the fact that these are one of many vehicles for supporting high quality inclusion. As a result, every opportunity for every audience underscores how much this is a way of looking at each child's development and supporting that trajectory. An example of a resource that Vermont will be developing to help any direct service provider, any leader, any faculty member to make the connection between those standards and inclusion is a toolkit of free resources that will identify evidence sources, print materials, audiovisual materials, and websites that can be used to build the bridges between those standards and opportunities to include each child. As the next slide shows you, there's other very exciting work going on, and Katie's going to tell you a little bit about that.
Act 166 is Vermont's universal pre-K law for every 3-, 4-, and 5-year-old that's not in kindergarten, and it is, of course, inclusive of children with disabilities. Universal pre-K will be fully implemented fall of this year, 2016. Vermont's pre-K law and rules require school districts to develop partnerships with community-based, pre-qualified early childhood programs to increase the school district capacity to offer young resident children publicly funded pre-K for 10 hours per week for 35 weeks a year. We will be working with an external contractor to help design our pre-K monitoring system that will incorporate monitoring of all of our pre-K programs. This will be based on the guiding principles for inclusion and research on evidence-based inclusive practices, which will align with our QRIS. Included within this system will be measures of fidelity that will ensure programs, teachers, administrators, and practitioners build their own capacity to support implementation of evidence-based practices for each and every child. We will be piloting this system over the next 2 years and sustaining it once it is approved. The Vermont AOE Pre-K Inclusion Coordinator is a new position that I am happy to hold, and it includes heading up professional learning for all school-based and community-based, including Head Start, pre-K programs. Many of the community-based preschools were not required to have an early childhood licensed educator until now. However, this is a requirement under Act 166. We have to make sure staff have access to tools and resources to support each child's access and participation in high-quality, inclusive early childhood settings. Like our early MTSS tiered system of support that we will mention later, we also recognize the need to include a tiered system of professional learning opportunities, including what, where, and how intense. And now, Camille, it's back to you.
So here, next slide, please. here are a couple more examples, and one is that Vermont is being very intentional about the way in which the voices of diverse families throughout the state are informing all the work that's going on. So there's an effort underway called the Vermont Family Stories Project that's going to enable us to really capture both the words and the images of families and to translate those to support our ongoing efforts in all aspects of this evolution. But skipping ahead to recommendation 7, which really looks at ways to build a coordinated early childhood professional development system, I want to just share an example of a way in which to underscore what Libby was also mentioning. Vermont is melding the new opportunities through the policy statement and their Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge grant work with existing structures. One thing that they are really interested in is looking at how the process of growing future professionals to support each young Vermont child in high-quality inclusive settings can be altered. And to that end, one of the things that they'll be doing is an inventory of faculty and other professional development providers to get a better sense of the extent to which they are knowledgeable about evidence-based practices that support inclusion and the different quality structures that are in place in Vermont. Based on that, we'll be able then to target professional development to best prepare those folks who are going to be part of the process of growing high-quality future professionals who will be able to support inclusion in the most effective way possible. We're also going to be taking a look at syllabi and the extent to which they feature an explicit and intentional emphasis on inclusion and supporting opportunities to really make some changes in those structures. So on the supply end, Vermont's really hoping that in addition to a variety of other strategies, we'll really be able to take a look at the what professional development providers and faculty members know and are able to do. So next slide.
So Libby and Beth, we're going to ask you, we were going to talk about our local level supports that are happening across the state, but wanted to know if you wanted to keep that until later.
I think go ahead and do it, but do it quickly because we want to leave plenty of time for Massachusetts.
Yep, okay. Well, Vermont is implementing early multi-tier systems of support. The effort began back in 2007 when we received TA support from the Center for Social Emotional Foundations for Early Learning, as well as the Center for Early Literacy Learning. And we did state cadres of training and all on the pyramid model practices. As that moved forward, the state lessons learned realized that we also needed the systems piece to coincide with the practice piece to support children's competence and social emotional development. And so utilizing the state personnel development grant as well as the Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge grant, we set out to really build the infrastructure for the systems, to build systems capacity at the local, regional, and state levels. So what we do promote is a set of cadre of trainers that train on the pyramid model practices, a cadre of systems coaches as well as practice-based coaches, and we are working with our national TA centers plus the Pyramid Model Consortium in order to implement these practices across the state. And this is including our pre-K development expansion grant sites as well. So, and if folks want to know more about that, we can certainly send the information.
That's fantastic. This is Libby again. So thank you, Vermont. So many things impressive about what you're doing. I think for the listeners, the most important thing is when you have pre-K for every 3- and 4-year-old in the whole state, not just those at risk, not just those at a certain economic level, but for every child, it's a lot easier to start talking systemically about how to do inclusion and assure every child and every teacher have the support they need to make this work.
So congratulations on that. I think you and BC are the first two states to achieve 3- and 4-year-old pre-K. Theirs is full day. I hope you'll do that at some point as well. That's great that you have 76% access too. That's pretty exciting. So Massachusetts, I know you have a wonderful story as well. So tell us a little bit about how your state is implementing the recommendations from the policy statement.
Sure. Hi, this is Lauren Viviani. I'm the 619 coordinator, and I'm here with Chris Pond, who's from our Department of Early Education and Care. And we work very closely together with all of our initiatives. And the first thing we did, actually, we were very fortunate, if you could go to the next slide, is that several years ago, our agencies came together with our Part C partners and our Race to the Top Early Learning Challenge partners and our Head Start partners. And we had a retreat day during which we established a vision for early childhood special education, which includes individualized resources and services for all kids. But the really important part, especially for this conversation, is that so kids can access and participate in general ed and in all aspects of the school and the community. And that's really important because this mission statement that we developed then drove our strategic plan, which we'll talk about in a little while. But so what we did is when the joint statement came out, we linked this vision statement with the joint statement, the federal paper, and just reinforced both documents together and posted our website and sent out some email reminders to our local folks, just so that everyone could kind of come together again and really talk about and think about what inclusive programming looks like and how we need to collaborate with all of the agencies involved in early childhood for kids with disabilities. So Chris is going to go to the next slide.
Next slide, please.
There we go.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the state-level interagency task force and plan for inclusion. And as Lauren said, I work for the Department of Early Education and Care, and she works with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed. However, we've really worked very hard in the state to really think about inclusion from birth to 3rd grade and how we support children in inclusive settings. And doesn't matter where you're sitting in terms of sectors. My department oversees early childhood programs in the community, and so Lauren and I have really worked hard as our state agencies to really think about what does that mean in terms of support. So one thing that I wanted to talk about that's really been a great success is we do have a birth to 3rd grade advisory group, and it's a group that's comprised of interagency stakeholder group comprised of state agencies, community programs, family community representatives and advocates, and higher education. And again, it's an opportunity for us to look at, as a state, what types of supports are being put into place to support educators who serve early childhood programs. We also, that group also advises on statewide initiatives for early childhood in terms of inclusive policies and practices. We also have, as most of us do, we have a preschool expansion grant, and so our Head Start group and the Early Childhood Special Education Department, and as well as Early Education and Care, have been partnering to really support how inclusion is going to happen around professional development. We also work very closely with our Part C partners, as Lauren mentioned earlier, to really think about from birth through school age, how do we really look at that continuum of learning and support as children are entering into the K-12 system. And we also have really thought about coaching and mentoring, which you'll hear a little bit of how we're doing different initiatives to really support educators, as we know that professional development alone is not going to move the needle. It's really how are we building systems and supports within the local infrastructure to really ensure that sustainability is occurring. So next slide, please.
So during our retreat, we had an opportunity to think about the vision, and then what are the action items from the vision that we're gonna work on. So these are our 3 action items, or our strategic plan, is to improving systems to engage with families, improving transitions from Part C to early ed and then to kindergarten, and then to improve instruction to increase educational outcomes. All of this is tied up or promotes how we can then improve inclusive programming for kids with disabilities. So if you go to the next slide, I'm going to go pretty quickly with our data slides. This is from our APR that we report to OSEP every year. As you can see from our data that the majority of our kids are with disabilities receive their services in inclusive programming. So that just kind of shows where the placements are over time, or at the home, which is also an inclusive environment. The next slide shows kind of our longitudinal data, where our targets are and where our actual is. Actually, we have we work very closely with our steering committee and other stakeholders through authentic stakeholder engagement meetings to set aggressive targets. So I feel really good about what we're doing, but like my esteemed colleagues in Maryland and Vermont said, we have a lot of work to do too, and so as we're thinking about changing the hearts and minds of folks in the state to promote inclusive opportunities, I think we can then go into the next slides, which talks about how we're going to do that. So we're fortunate in Massachusetts that our stakeholders, and supported by our senior leadership and the State Director of Special Education, said, you know, we think the State Systemic Improvement Plan for our Part B, or for the APR for OSEP, should be focused on early childhood. After talking to a lot of folks, we decided to narrow down our SIMR, or State Identified Measurable Result, to focus on early childhood outcomes in the social emotional realm. So our entire SIP for our OSIP reporting is based on improving social emotional outcomes for young children with disabilities, which then, as we're training teachers and we are supporting our PEG grantees and our preschool expansion grant folks, our Head Start folks, our community child care centers, and our public preschools with the pyramid or positive behavior supports and the families, that just, again, reinforces inclusive opportunities for everybody. We also have a lot of MOUs in which we work with, again, all our community partners to say, hey, let's promote best practices. This is what we're going to do. This is what you're going to do. Here's our agreement. Here's how we're going to do this, to just make sure services are smooth and transitions are smooth and outcomes are improved for kids. If we could go to the next slide.
So in terms of just thinking about some high-quality inclusion activities that we're doing here in Massachusetts, we have several different types of grants, but one particularly, our Coordinated Community Family Engagement Grant, really works on thinking about children who are not in formal care. But it also ties into our family and community engagement in general on how we're supporting families as we think about this process, as they're the core for this work. And should never be thought of as an addition to what we're doing. And so this grant really focuses, and it's across our state, and it really we have individuals, director, who really focus on thinking about community supports that, such as play groups or comprehensive services that can be thought about across communities, and also connected to school districts in the community, and also early childhood programs. We also support, we call something in Mass, we say mixed delivery system here in Massachusetts, which really for us means that we look at all areas such as Head Start, public school, preschool, community early childhood programs, and we really do think about how the whole system is to be supported in anything that we do around professional development or policies that we put into place to really ensure that children with disabilities who are in their local community programs have the same access that any child who lives in that community would be supported by. All right. Next slide, please.
Yeah, great. And all of this, so on this slide, the top bullet, development of integrated curriculum and DEC recommended practices to support inclusion, is a new thing that we're just launching. We just signed we're working with UMass Boston, one of our local universities, to look at the DEC recommended practices, look at how kids engage in everyday activities and play, and then integrate the components of early literacy and positive behavior supports, and then design a lot of curriculum materials for our public preschools, for our Head Start folks, for our PEG folks, for all, like Chris said, the mixed delivery system, including family modules. So this is a really exciting event, especially as we're going deeper in our pyramid work or our positive behavior support work in the state. So this is kind of the next step that we're going to be supporting then early literacy and routine building and all of these things for teachers, for directors, for families, to really support inclusive environments across all community settings. And the other thing that we do finally is, of course, I can't leave out our PTR, our Parent Training and Information Center. They have been so incredibly helpful with rolling out our SSIP, with rolling out supporting inclusion environments, with training families and providing the support that families need to also get high-quality inclusion services.
Next slide, please. So last but not least is all the supports we think about that are really helpful in rolling some of this work out, and that would be our grants. And so we have several different grants in our state, and there's more, but these four we wanted to highlight that speak to how we continue to support inclusion and children with disabilities. So at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed, there are program improvement type grants that programs are able to access and really think about their practices and their programs as they're developing new maybe initiatives. We also have special education professional development that we, as I said earlier, we do together between both departments to make sure that whatever we're rolling out, that any person who's working with early childhood has the same information so that the message and the communication is seamless and is clear. We have inclusive preschool learning environment grants that really add to supporting if there's an additional staff person to really support classroom educators. And then we also have a grant that's the Early Childhood Mental Health Grant that really is looking at how to support children who may be presenting with some challenging behaviors in the classroom. As we probably all have heard, this has been some increase that we've heard continually around children who are presenting with challenging behaviors, and this is something where this grant allows early childhood mental health folks to go into programs and really work with them to really think about plans. It lines nicely with the positive behavior support work that we're doing in terms of rolling out the pyramid model work here in Massachusetts, and so those are some resource allocations that do support continued work as we think about how to support programs.
So I just want to the caveat of those grants is this is an addition to our entitlement grants, so these are all discretionary grants. So these are additional monies that we provide for our local folks to do the work that we are asking them to do to promote inclusion. So here's just some contact information. We'd be more than happy to talk with you and share our ideas and get ideas from everybody out there too. So thanks for having us.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Massachusetts, you're doing so many wonderful things, and it's pretty exciting to see the kind of the birth to third grade focus. I know you've done a lot of work in that area, and that's pretty exciting. I think we have a few minutes to actually do a little bit more discussion and go a little bit deeper. And so I'm going to throw out a question, and any of the teams can answer, or all of them you can answer. First question is, have any of you actually closed down segregated classrooms where you had a classroom where all the kids had disabilities, or actually integrated that in a really meaningful way? Anyone want to take that question on? So can I assume with that no one has, that either you didn't have segregated classrooms or you didn't close any of them because you didn't have them?
So, hi, this is Lauren from Massachusetts. What our data is showing us is that we are improving our inclusion. So the data that I showed from the APR, our inclusion numbers are increasing over time. Some separate or segregated classrooms are also decreasing over time. So to say that have we closed classrooms, I can't answer that with any certainty, but I do know that our trend lines are going towards more inclusive environments. And so that's what our data shows.
Great. Anyone else want to comment on that? That's exactly what we want to see, of course.
Right. So this is Nancy in Maryland. We've seen a similar sort of positive movement towards more children being reported in inclusive settings and with their services being provided in those settings, so that we're also reducing the pullout.
Yeah, and you're also, hope changing, I'm sure you are, the mindset of the personnel who are in the segregated classrooms to help them realize that they can be a resource and a leader for many classrooms or for one classroom and really work to ensure children are integrated. Yeah, anyone else want to comment on that before I go to my next question and then we'll close?
This is Vermont. This is Kate. We have not closed any separate classrooms just because our how we want to move toward more quality inclusive settings, and given our universal pre-K now, that I think everybody's really thinking that is in the best interest of the children, and they are adapting varying models across the state, but mostly it is inclusive classrooms, which we're very excited about.
So my final question is really quickly, and probably only one state can answer, is have you found that parents are sometimes resistant because they really feel like the specialized services are better? And if so, what have you done about it? Anyone want to take that one on?
So, hi, this is Lauren Viviani again from Massachusetts. So, I think that with our partnership with our PTI and our additional training that we're doing with districts to support inclusion and support positive behavior supports in the home and promote kind of the community-wide aspect, I think that is, while certainly we don't want to negate any of the I in the IEP, we certainly are promoting supports and strategies that are functional, that go across environments, and I think that is helping everybody in the community to support kids' needs.
Right. Good thing to point out. Thank you so much. Well, thank each of the teams. You all are awesome. What you're doing every day for kids makes us all smile, certainly makes me smile. There's not a topic I'd like to talk about better than this, because I do think it's a key to ensuring that that preschool and early learning will continue to expand, and not just for some kids, but for all kids. Reminder, I want you to visit the Early Learning website at www.ed.gov/early-learning/inclusion. This website has resources for states, local programs, providers, families to support high-quality inclusion in early childhood programs. And we will be scheduling other webinars. Hopefully it'll start on time next time. Thank you all for bearing with us through that. And really, I hope we can continue learning from you and with you about what would work. And finally, thanks for taking something that was kind of an idea at the federal level and making it real and making us realize that our work does make a difference. So thank you all, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.